Thanks for joining this. If you were watching a little bit ago, we tried to have some sound problems, so I'm just going to take two, okay? And first of all, I wanted to talk about some of the news that is pouring out of the administration, as seems to happen all the time. One of the really important bits of news is that everybody seems to be suspecting that Mike Flynn may be on his way out as National Security Advisor after having allegedly misled the vice president before the vice president went public about his contacts with Russia. And so if Flynn is out, there are all kinds of theories about who might replace him. Dave Petraeus is one. That would certainly be progress. I mean, frankly, almost anybody would be progress over Flynn, who is kind of a catastrophe, I think, in the role of National Security Advisor. We also saw, kind of related to that, a great piece on the front page of the New York Times today about the chaos within the NSC, and a piece over the weekend by John Schindler arguing that the intelligence community is now reluctant to share some information with the White House, and that they fear that the Situation Room, that Russia has ears in the Situation Room, that information going to the White House may end up in Russia's hands. And indeed, related to that, CNN reported Friday night that the U.S. intelligence community has verified some of the non-salacious bits in that dossier about Trump and Russia ties. So much happening. There's also some indications that there's a crackdown on immigrants underway, and while Trump says that these are folks who have committed crimes, gang members, etc., it doesn't indeed seem to be catching up a lot of folks who absolutely are not criminals. So we're watching that. It's a little unclear how brand new this is. I also I announced in my column that I have chosen a winner for my annual trip to take a student with me on a reporting trip. The student is Aneri Patani of Northeastern University, a terrific journalist, and it looks as if we'll go mostly to Liberia to look at global health, nutrition, education there. We may also go to Sao Tome and Principe, a nearby island country, partly because I've never been to Sao Tome, and I'm kind of eager to see it. It also seems to have the highest anemia rates in the world, and a lot of nutritional issues. Let me chat a bit about my column for Sunday. If you haven't seen it, this is it. It's husbands are deadlier than terrorists. Not this husband, but the point is that the Trump administration has gone absolutely all out to try to reduce the risk to the U.S. from jihadi terrorism. And there is absolutely a real risk there. But he's creating tremendous inconvenience for people, barring doctors from the U.S., barring university students, damaging the soft power of the United States. And in fact, since 1975, nobody from those 7 countries he's named has committed a single terrorist murder in the U.S. And I guess the point of my column is that in that same period since 1975, okay, 0 from terrorists from those countries, 0 killings, and more than 1.3 million gun deaths in the U.S. in that same period. 1.3 million versus 0. And while we're going all out to try to reduce the one risk, we're doing almost nothing to prevent the other. And in fact, Trump is expanding, or seems to be moving to expand gun rights, particularly to get rid of gun-free zones around schools. There's an effort by Donald Trump Jr. to make gun silencers, more available. And I guess what troubles me is that, disparity, that we should obviously try to make Americans safer, and we should do that in immigration, we should do that with chemicals, with household belongings. We've done that incredibly successfully with vehicles. The fatality rate per million miles driven has come down by about 95% since cars came to be on the road. We haven't done that with firearms. And there's a lot we can do in that regard. I think one of the lessons that we've learned is that liberals often, I think, focused mistakenly on the weapons themselves, and that what seems to be a smarter approach is to focus on access to firearms, and that's where husbands come in. That we have one of the most dangerous times for somebody to have a weapon is when you have a man who has a conviction for violence or for alcohol offenses recently and separates from his wife or girlfriend and has a domestic violence restraining order against him. That's a moment when people are likely to snap. When people snap and have an access to a weapon, that becomes dangerous for themselves and for others. And so, look, there are always going to be a lot of gun deaths. There don't need to be 33,000 a year. So my argument is we should be a lot more balanced in how we try to make Americans safer and look not just at terrorism risks, but also at the risks of gun deaths and violence. I'm sure a lot of folks disagree with me. Is that what you're operating the camera? Try to pick out some folks who think I'm completely out to lunch. So I'd welcome that.
Well, so first we have a question from Rachel Hurwitz, and she says, in this age of alternative facts, can you explain a little bit about how the New York Times verifies information through sources? Some people are saying that the Times is also fake news or using alternative facts. Sure,
and look, the New York Times makes mistakes periodically. We will quote somebody as saying things that turn out later to be incorrect, or if you went on the New York Times website on election day last November, then you would have seen a prediction from an algorithm that Hillary Clinton was very likely to win, and that was obviously false. So we make mistakes, but I guess the difference is we try to get things right, and then we fix things when we get them wrong. And so we always try to use named sources. When we can't get a source on the record, then we're reluctant to use information. We try to get multiple sources to agree on things, especially if they're if they're disparaging about somebody. If we're asking somebody their age, we don't need a second source on that. But if they're making accusations against others, we want as many sources as we can possibly get. And I've got to say, it's kind of demoralizing when people compare the reporting of the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or whatever it may be, where there is a real effort to get things right, yet we sometimes screw up, with that of the classic fake news where there is complete indifference to what is truth and false, and there's simply an effort to maximize an algorithm and maximize the number of eyeballs with things that are often just completely concocted.
Pamela Thomas asks, what are we to make of the potential effect of the Russian dossier?
What I hear is that the intelligence community finds some important elements of the dossier to be credible, that they would not have put them in the president's daily brief if they had not. As I said, CNN has since reported that intercepts from Russia have confirmed some elements of the dossier. And, what got a lot of attention, especially on social media, was the salacious stuff about Trump and prostitutes, this kind of thing. But the stuff that really was most important was the suggestions there was collusion between the Trump team and Russia to try to interfere with the integrity of the U.S. election. We don't know if that's true. There are a bunch of folks who are investigating it, and I think that we're going to hear more about it. I think we should be reluctant to speculate when we don't have more information, but I'm trying to report on this. I know a lot of other people are, and that ultimately is what matters. If there was an effort to collude with a foreign power to manipulate a U.S. presidential election, that's Watergate cubed.
Jim Carroll asks, do you have any thoughts or comments on Stephen Miller?
I don't know if folks saw Stephen Miller's comments over the weekend on the Sunday shows. It's actually worth looking up. The guy says things that have just no relationship to truth. He was talking about the voter fraud allegations and kept insisting that large numbers of people were bussed into New Hampshire to vote illegally. There's no evidence for that. Then he asserted that 14% of I forget whether he asserted that 14% of voters are illegal immigrants or 14% of illegal immigrants vote. Both are false. He based that on a completely discredited survey that a follow-up found was completely wrong, and it makes these allegations that are in themselves an attack on the U.S. electoral system. And I'm not sure whether Miller's attempt is to really assert these things or whether he really believes them, whether he lives in some kind of alternate universe in which he thinks these are facts. But I think it's also possible he's just trying to muddy everything and make everything contested so that there is no black, no white, so that there's no fact, no distortion. Everything is up for grabs. And that is wrong, and that's what I think we in journalism need to push back at. Yes, there are a lot of things that are contested. There are a lot of ambiguities, but there are some things that are facts that relate to the world around us, and we have to regard those as a starting point to interact with the world. And when a White House official goes around asserting nonsense, then that's an attack on the whole basis of reality that is essential to governing.
And final question from Zara Jafari Beg. They say, how likely do you think it is that Saudi Arabia had its hands on the Muslim ban in a way of using the U.S. in a proxy war against Iran?
I don't think that is the case in this situation, because while Iranians were barred from the U.S., and that's kind of crazy since Iranians haven't been committing terrorist crimes in the U.S., and in fact there are 9,000 Iranian nationals who are doctors in the U.S., many in the small towns. We depend on them. They're now barred if they leave the country. But on the other hand, you also have other countries, including Yemenis, and the Saudi Arabia is now colluding with Yemen. You have a number of other countries that I don't think Saudi Arabia would have put on that list. So I think this was just Trump's people trying to follow a campaign promise, not understanding the reality, not doing their homework, not consulting with Homeland Security or the State Department or others, and writing an executive order with complete indifference to that world around them. And just on the subject of Saudi Arabia, though, I think we have to acknowledge that Saudi Arabia has been funding extremist madrasas around the world in ways that inculcate extremism, misogyny, and that lead some young people to become violent jihadis. And at home, Saudi Arabia has tried to suppress some of the voices of a reform. I had an email this morning about a woman, Mrs. Badawi, who apparently has now been called in, a human rights activist there. And maybe what I object to most is that Saudi Arabia has been, with U.S. support, has been blockading Yemen, causing millions of Yemeni children to be malnourished. And now, and it was a huge mistake for the U.S. to get behind that. Now the Trump White House seems to be trying to send a message to Iran by backing Saudi Arabia even more in what seems to me to be crimes against humanity, to blockade these ports, to deny food to Yemeni kids. I hope that'll be reconsidered. Thanks for joining the conversation. If you haven't seen the column "Husbands Are Deadlier Than Terrorists," then check it out. It's not a slap in the face of husbands. I'm one myself, and I don't think I'm particularly deadly, but every day many men do kill their domestic partners every day, and that's an example of a problem that we need to do a better job addressing, not just focus exclusively with this obsession with violent jihadi terrorists. Thanks for joining us.